hands up who has had essay crises at university, or just crises in general. So I had a presentation crisis a couple of nights ago because the good folk at Spiritus and MBM said many, many moons ago, what is the title of your talk? So I gave them a title. This is the title. 21st Century Alchemy, Blockchain and Open Source. So great, I had a title, but then I figured, what was I going to talk about? So I thought I'd start by talking about identity. Anyone know who this is? Come on, come on. Thank you, Mark Strong. And who's this? Mark Strong? Brian May? It's actually a representation of Sir Isaac Newton, who John Maynard Keynes said was not the first of the Age of Reason, but the last of the magicians. Why? Because in addition to his theory of gravitational Newtonian mechanics, he was an alchemist, he was a spiritualist, he was a scholar. And interestingly, and I will get onto the topic of blockchain and open source at some point in this presentation, a lot of his readings, a lot of his writings, I beg your pardon, were offered to various universities, collections, and refused. Why? Because people didn't want to disrupt the notion of Sir Isaac Newton, the physicist, the mathematician, by introducing additional material, which was quite frankly crazy. Now, fortunately, and I'll share the links after this talk, there are now a number of projects that are trying to provide us with the person in the round and collect all of his works. There's a thing called the Newton Project, nothing to do with Steve Jobs. And the idea is to actually give us access to all of his material. And the reason I pick on alchemy is alchemy has a couple of definitions. The first, I'm sure you're familiar with, and you've probably tried this yourselves, is take some, something like lead or whatever and turn it into gold. By the way, that's nothing to do with Bitcoin, just happens to be up there. The second, and I think probably, from my point of view, more interesting and more, if you like, generalized notion, is this idea of taking, of almost, it's almost a sleight of hand, it's almost magic to be able to take something and transform it and create something new and wonderful out of it. And if that's alchemy, then 21st century alchemy, I would argue, or posit, is open source. I assume you all know what open source is at this point. Anybody not? Oh, well, anyway, the point about open source is it's not just software, it's hardware, it's processes. But the idea is that you collaborate together on a project, whatever that project is. So there's something called Open Compute, which is an attempt to create, if you like, open designs for hardware. Open source, which I'm very involved in, is, I think, when you do it right, a magical, transformational experience. And one where you share and you sometimes yell at people in the community. But what you're really doing is you're working towards an end goal which is bigger or greater than you or your company or your institution. And here's just some of the, whoops, sorry. There's a build here somewhere. Here are just some of the 21st century alchemists that I know. So I chose, in the case of Linus Torvald, not to use that picture, which is quite famous for, but pick another one. But the important thing about this is all of these people, and they're just a handful of people that I know and have worked with and admire greatly, is they're all involved in open source of one form, shape, or another. So we've ended with Sam Ramji, who led the Cloud Foundry project at the Linux Foundation for a couple of years. Incredibly thoughtful guy. One of the things that he said, and this kind of relates back to what you were talking about at the beginning of this morning, Susan, this notion of frameworks and governance. And there are stats that say an open source project that is within a governance framework is going to be 10 times as successful, have 10 times, or probably even more, people contributing to it, and will be far more likely to be adopted than one that is, if you like, open source in the same way that the poems that I wrote when I was an angst-ridden teenager, I could publish. Fortunately for your sakes, I haven't. But if I did, it would be vanity publishing, right? So a lot of open source, if somebody says, yeah, I've open sourced my whatever, and it's not put into a framework, it's not contributed. I don't mean donated, because, again, contribution means that there is a framework around that in terms of I let you use this software, if we're talking software, under the following conditions. So, and if you use it that way, then I guarantee not to accuse you of infringing copyright or infringing any patents that I may hold relating to that. So the point is that without that framework, open source is just vanity publishing. So this is my, if you like, manifesto, I guess you can call it. Blockchain and open source. Number one, and I've sort of alluded to this, it's too valuable or too big, not too big to fail, but too valuable to be owned by a single company, stroke entity, stroke whatever. And it's too critical to be controlled, likewise, by a single company, entity, institution, whatever. Do you agree? You're very quiet. And this is the is-ought debate. Should I have said, should never be or can never be proprietary or closed source? I opted for at 1 a.m. in the morning, can never be, I beg your pardon. What do I mean by that? Well, it's linked to the first 2 points. If something is closed source, if it is proprietary, then I can't inspect it. One of the interesting things about the whole field of cryptography and security is it's far better if the algorithms are open sourced, because the algorithms are the things that you need to inspect and understand. What they do, of course, is encrypt things, but it's a mistake people make where they think, I have to somehow hide from everybody how I do this. The process needs to be auditable. And by the way, some of my best friends are auditors. Just thought I'd throw that in there. But the idea of being able to audit the code, understand how it works, and basically debug it if necessary. Incredibly important. And this is related, and I'm not the only one saying this, it must be developed, blockchain that is, in the open from the outset. Of course, people experiment and then they put something out there, but you do not want to do something, work on it for like 5 years, and then open source it. And you can do that, it's not illegal, but you're making a fundamental mistake, which is you're inviting people in to look at something that by then is probably, quote unquote, in your mind, the finished article. And that's really A, somewhat hubristic, and B, it doesn't give other people the chance to actually be involved on the journey, in the process of discovering what it is and what is that common sort of aim. So I'm going to talk about blockchain technology partners for a few minutes and how we see ourselves playing a role within this notion of blockchain and open source. So when you're at a conference, you try and boil down what it is you do to something very, very simple, because you're on a stand and you're exhausted, and by day 3 or 4, I guess you went through this just a few days ago, it's like, I don't want to speak to anybody. I know I'm meant to be here because I'm meant to be sponsoring this thing or whatever. And so you end up saying, well, all right, what is it we do? We provide a platform so you don't have to, okay? That's it. That's all we do. It ties in very much with what Paul said at the outset, that blockchain, and I echo this, is a foundational technology. When I was at uni, I studied philosophy, but I did philosophy and mathematics. I think you'll go mad if you just do philosophy on its own. So you need to have context. So likewise, a foundational technology, you can admire it, it's beautiful to look at, but it's only really useful if you apply it to something or some set of problems. And you'll hear as we go through the day, some great examples of where it's appropriate to apply blockchain, or more generally speaking, DLTs, distributed ledger technology. We say blockchain the same way we say Hoover, I guess. It's just become the thing, but it's not always a blockchain per se. But the idea is to radically simplify the adoption of this technology. In order to do that, you've got to give people the ability to get on and get moving and get creative and do stuff very, very quickly. So the best way of doing that, in our view, is to give you a platform. So the tagline, because you have to have a tagline, is bringing the benefits of this technology to businesses and to enterprise. And there was a reference which we probably should just revisit, this difference between public and private. It's a false dichotomy, okay? There's private and public cloud, and I sort of cut my teeth on the whole cloud thing many years ago, and it suited AWS at the time to say, and I was there when Werner Vogel said it. Sounds like a character out of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, doesn't it? Werner Vogel. Anyway, Werner said, private cloud is false cloud. Well, of course, it suited AWS at the time to say that because they were pretty early on in the business of actually creating what is now the fastest growing and most stable and robust public cloud we've ever seen. They don't have it all their own way, by the way, because Alibaba are doing an incredible job. Likewise, so is Microsoft's Azure and Google, not to be outdone, of course. But my point is that it is a false dichotomy. It's really about the application or the use case. And it's not really private. It's more, is something permissioned or permissionless? So can anybody add a node to the Ethereum public network? Yes. Don't do it. Or at least don't do it on your laptop, which is what I tried to do. Because days later, I ran out of storage and I still hadn't called up. So, but in theory, anybody can just rock up and join the party. A permissioned environment, and you'll be hearing from Casey, and so his company has contributed some fantastic technology to an organization I'm involved with, which I'll talk about in a minute. You'll hear us talking about permissioned, not private, because permissioned is really saying we need to know who's involved, because there is a community that we want to engage with. We want to deliver the agreements network or agreements sort of platform to a specific community. And that's fine, because KYC, know your customer, know your client, is absolutely essential in many, many businesses. Anyway, I realize I've spoken for quite a long time, and I've got approximately 6 minutes and 40 seconds left, so I'll try and speed up. It's very hard to judge these things, especially if you don't look at the clock. Anyway, what is this slide telling you? It's saying, from a company perspective, we are heavily vested in not just open source, but a particular way of doing open source. I alluded to that earlier. The Linux Foundation, Linus Torvald is actually employed by the foundation. Why? Because he essentially, gracefully, gave the rights to Linux to the foundation. And so the foundation has, over the years, not just become the curator of Linux itself, and I don't just mean Linux, I mean automotive Linux, various other flavors, real-time Linux, and so on and so forth, but it's now created something like 40-plus collaborative projects. And we overload the word project. We talk about open source projects, collaborative projects, whatever. But the general idea is they provide a home for initiatives. In this case, I'm going to highlight two. Hyperledger is really providing a set of technologies aimed at business around blockchain. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation is the home for Kubernetes. So why is this important? It's back to what I was saying earlier about the governance being a critical part of an open source initiative. So this is the Hyperledger greenhouse. I mean, I give up. I try to get them to call it something else. The greenhouse is this is naming things by committee, unfortunately. So anyway, the greenhouse, or rather the big tent, as Brian, the director, calls it, which I think is far sort of more accurate, is a set of things, a set of frameworks. So Burrow, which I, as a member of the Sawtooth community, borrow because we use their EVM, is a great example of collaboration between quite distinct frameworks. But the point is there are 5 frameworks. We're trying to get better at actually explaining to people the difference. I was at their member summit where we talked about how do we do that. Nobody wanted to actually say, this is better than that, because nobody wanted to tread on anybody's toes, except I'm like, well, that's great, but somebody's going to say that if we don't help people. So the idea that we came up with, which is kind of a halfway house, is we'll give you the ability to evaluate these frameworks. So we'll give you the tools, and we'll give you what we think are the sensible metrics if you're trying to do a comparison between them. And then CNCF is the home of Kubernetes, Prometheus, and various other open source projects. And in the interest of time, what are we doing with these? We're putting them together and creating a platform so you don't have to, okay? That's what that slide's really saying. We call it Sextant. So it's a management platform, but crucially, it's also a curated distribution or release, to use an old-fashioned word, but quite, I would say, relevant. It's a curated release of, in this case, Hyperledger Sawtooth. So again, it's about, if you want to consume technology, you can actually go take the latest overnight build because everyone's working on this round the clock, around the world. Or if you're in a business, you probably want a curated version. So Red Hat has done this quite famously with something called Fedora. Red Hat, the Fedora, it all makes sense in some stupid, geeky way. But anyway, the idea is they've created Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Why? Because Fedora is leading bleeding edge, and so they take stable components of that, package it up, and provide it. These days, however, providing, and by the way, sextants are still in use. This is actually, I'm sure there'll be a movie about it where some astronaut runs out of power and whatever, but luckily they've got a sextant so they can find their way home. It's not actually a joke. If you ever listen to the playback of Neil Armstrong, they're using a sextant to actually navigate their way to the moon. It's fascinating. It's been around since forever, but this notion of being able to navigate your way, find your way through things, is something we think is a very strong thing. So in this time, you can look at these slides later, but the thing we've produced is 2 things. So it's a thing, but 2 things. It's the distribution, and then it's the ability to then deploy that and run it in the cloud. I say cloud. Cloud marketplaces, if you've not come across them, are now the way in which software is essentially distributed. It's the way it's sold. AWS has like 4,000 plus things you can go buy. This is not the retail, but it's the same idea. So you can go to their marketplace, and the nice thing is you can try stuff. You don't have to talk to me or listen to me, or you're being very gracious listening, but the idea is you make it available to people, make it accessible to them, and then if they want to talk to you, they can, but it's easy to consume, easy to work with. And finally, co-creation is a thing. So you were talking about your experience at this conference, and everyone seems like they're just out of college and whatnot. So there are some strange concepts people come up with. There are also some good ones. This is one of the better ones. Co-creation, and I think I should probably delete management, because if management starts co-creating, we're all doomed. So I should edit that. Unfortunately, this is the definition. I guess because it's Wikipedia, I can actually edit it. I'll do that later. So let's see if it changes or somebody changes it back. It'll be me versus management. But it's the idea of coming together to create something that is of joint value. And that value, and you'll hear about this as we go through the rest of the day, is really what we're here to share with you. It's the value of the technology that we're working with. And if you want to co-create, you can come here. This is Codebase. This is where I hang out. There's Codebase here in Edinburgh, now in Stirling, now in Aberdeen, and I think we're exporting it. We're trying to explain the notion of co-creation to people down south. I think they're getting it slowly. And finally, I'd like to leave you with some music to take you into your coffee break. So this is Sextant from a film I recommend that you go see. It won't win any Oscars, or if it does, it shouldn't. But it's a beautiful film. And this is actually the sequence where they are actually using a sextant in order to actually say, where exactly is the moon? And also, more importantly, I've got to not point at it. If I do that, I'll miss it. It's physics. I've actually got to, meet it and then be caught in its gravitational pull. Anyway, it's now coffee time. Thank you very much.